Thank you, Sharon, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcel Bradshaw, and as Sharon has said, I'm responsible for the UK retail investors for Orbis Investments. Now, my aim is to tell you a little bit about Orbis Investments in the UK. Our story started in 1973 when our founder, Allan Gray, established the asset management firm Allan Gray in South Africa. Currently, one of the leading asset management firms in South Africa. Orbis was set up in 1989 to take Allan's investment approach global. In the UK, we offer three strategies. We offer a global equity for your more aggressive investor, 5-year plus horizon, a global balance for your moderate risk investor, about a 5-year horizon, and then a global cautious up to 3-year horizon for your more cautious investor. But what makes Orbis Investments unique, and why should you have a look at Orbis Investments? First of all, we privately owned. That's a very big benefit because we don't have outside shareholders that can mix in with our investment approach and long-term vision. Importantly, we've got a 30-year track record of long-term outperformance. So we've got the pedigree. If you add the Allan Gray performance, we are looking at closer to 50 years. Importantly, we co-invest with you, our clients. What does that mean? First of all, that means that if you get hurt, we get hurt. We in it together, and we've got skin in the game, which we think is important when you manage a client's money. Lastly, within our funds, you only pay us for our performance, and we actually refund you if we underperform. So our interests are totally aligned. We want you to outperform because then we get paid. If you don't outperform, we don't get paid. So we totally align with you as the investor. I'm now going to hand you over to Paul Beard. Paul is the founder and executive chairman of the Alexander Beard Group. Thank you, Paul.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? My name is Paul Beard. I'm the founder and executive chairman of the Alexander Beard Group. I founded the company 33 years ago. That's better. Good morning again. I founded the company 33 years ago this October, and we now have 3 offices in the UK. Our head office is in the beautiful county of Cheshire, and we have an office in London and in Yorkshire. Our international offices are in San Francisco, Perth in Australia, Johannesburg, Lyon in France, and Den Bosch in Holland, as well as having representation in Germany and Canada. We have 3 divisions: a wealth management business, which is where the company started. We have an international employee benefit division, and we have an expat services division, which is predominantly looking after globally mobile expats. And that's how we came to be involved in looking at the South African expat market. I'd like to also thank the South African Chamber and Orbis as sponsors of this webinar for inviting us to participate. It's most appreciated. Now, many South Africans living in the United Kingdom have pension plans, assets, other funds and cash still within South Africa. You live here and you need to make your UK assets grow and make best use of the assets you have left behind in South Africa. And that's what we hope to help you with over the coming months and years. How do you know you're doing the right thing and the best thing for your specific needs? How do you regain your stranded assets if you would like to transfer them out of South Africa? How do you choose the best planning given both countries' needs, taxation systems, etc.? And is advice for both jurisdictions included in your longer term objectives and your financial plans? We believe that these are important questions that often busy people don't have the proper time to address. Many of you will have left funds back home in South Africa. These assets often risk getting forgotten for years at a time. We have seen this with expats of other nationalities around the world. We're all very busy, and we would like to help simplify that for you with offering one advisory service cross-border to coordinate your global wealth management and your financial planning. This webinar, we hope, will address assets such as your pensions, retirement plans, endowment funds, life insurance, and more. What choices do you have? Why repatriating them may be or may not be the best for you? As an individual, what planning should you be considering? And how do your longer term plans of living here in the UK impact upon your global strategy? The value that we believe we can bring is managing global assets, specialising in South Africa, Australia, United States, France, and the UK. And we have an invaluable one-stop solution with deep local knowledge, helping to keep you legal, reducing time and potential conflicts while you look after your career and your family. I would now like to introduce you and hand over to Warren Berryman, who is one of the two directors of Alexander Beard South Africa. Warren will take you through our stranded assets service in relation to the various plans and holdings you may have left back in South Africa. So Warren, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Releasing stranded assets. By definition, what we mean by that is assets that are now locally in South Africa while you are residing, living, and paying tax in the United Kingdom. These assets can be basically grouped into two sections. First section being your compulsory funds, which are made up by the pension funds, provident funds, retirement annuities, and preservation funds. All these funds are governed by the Pension Fund Act in South Africa. The discretionary monies, which would be your endowment policies, your tax-free savings accounts, your flexible investments, which are platform-based, and your unit trusts as an individual investor in South Africa. With new legislation that is being introduced in the budget speech of the 2020 budget of South Africa by Tito Mboweni, our finance minister, exchange controls are being relaxed in South Africa. They have relaxed over a number of years, but it seems to be speeding up a little bit at present. So these compulsory assets that have always been tied up here are now available to be released. There's a process that would be followed. Your discretionary money would fall into the 1 million allowance, which every taxpayer in South Africa is entitled to. A husband and wife could effectively, if they're both registered taxpayers or were taxpayers in South Africa, could exercise that 1 million option relatively easily. It's literally done through the financial institution you bank with. For amounts between 1 million and 10 million, that process would be then used via a tax clearance certificate from the South African Revenue Services. When you start talking about amounts above the 10 million mark, the new verification process is going to come into play. By exporting these assets, the verification process will no longer go through the Reserve Bank of South Africa. It'll be a vetting process. If we can move to the next slide, the financial immigration process that we're all quite aware of. Beforehand, when you had to financially immigrate from South Africa, there was Reserve Bank involved. There was the South African Revenue Services involved. This process now has been aligned to more like the UK and the rest of the countries like Australia and the US. So Alexander Beard South Africa, in order to assist with these assets and the transfer of them, would fundamentally require a letter of authority to investigate, determine the value of these assets, where they're sitting, and then obviously the application process in order to move these assets, liquidate them, move them into a blocked rand account, which is currently still required, but we are hoping that in the not too distant future, a blocked rand account will be done away with. tax clearance or clearance from the South African Reserve Bank will no longer be required. What they fundamentally mean by that is an individual that has immigrated financially, in other words, you've closed out everything in South Africa, you completely reside over there, and you pay tax in the UK, will be seen exactly the same way as a United Kingdom resident. So you haven't financially immigrated, you just reside in the UK, you pay tax in the UK, you can prove that you tax registered and that you are a resident in the UK. You will be treated as identically as to a full financial immigrant, which makes it a lot easier when it comes to moving these compulsory and discretionary funds. With regards to Alexander Beard, obviously we can assist in the local distribution, analyzing what you've got here, help you process the liquidation, move into a blocked rand account. And then obviously we can assist through Alexander Beard in our UK branch to reinvest those monies in pound sterling, and obviously align it with the financial planning process that you have or that you intend to have in the UK. We do have quite a close and good relationship with the Investec Bank with regards to foreign currency exchange, as well as the Investec Bank can set up that blocked rand account for you in the interim in order to hold those funds before we can actually fundamentally transfer them across to the UK. And on that basis, I'd like to hand over to Gordon Berryman, my co-director in South Africa, just to take you through the managing your RSA assets. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Warren. As Warren alluded to slightly earlier, the assets that remain in South Africa still need to be managed, and you still need to receive advice on those assets. And often people immigrate, and that retirement annuity or their preservation fund is left behind and often forgotten. You talk like that. We had one client now that we actually got hold of, residing in Australia, and he had actually forgotten that he had this money even in South Africa. So those monies need to be managed, and sometimes the portfolios need to be rebalanced in line with your changes in your financial goals. So that is one of the services that we're going to offer through Alexander Beard South Africa. Is anybody that has assets here that needs ongoing management, we are here to assist. The other advantage of using a global company like ours is that we do have offices in both countries, and a global and holistic approach to financial management and advice needs to be considered. Looking at your assets in the UK and looking at your assets in South Africa and coming up with a one structured financial plan is the most effective way to achieve your goals. By doing that, it separates also that you'll end up with conflicting advice from two different advisors with two different ideas on where you should be and where you shouldn't be. By using one company, you save in the sense of one time, and you're getting a holistic reporting on all your assets in each country, saving you a lot of time. As everybody's so busy these days, it's a cost-effective and a time-effective way of doing business. The other thing that I wanted to chat about this afternoon is a lot of expats that have left South Africa had their own businesses or were shareholders in businesses in South Africa, and whether they've set up their own businesses in the UK as well. So one of the things that we advocate here in our business is that people have what we call a buy and sell agreement. And that is where you have yourself as a shareholder and existing shareholders. If something should happen to one of the shareholders, whether it be death or permanent disability, that there is an agreement in place that the existing shareholders purchase those shares from that deceased shareholder or disabled shareholder. The monies are then paid out to the family, and the business then in South Africa would then carry on, and the assets would be transferred over to the UK and used to carry on investing and looking after the family. The best way to liquidate that share is by way of a life policy, which, if structured correctly, is not taxable in South Africa. It would be part of your asset, which is the actual share value in the business. So we can assist with drafting of the agreements, as well as ensuring the client so that money is available immediately should something happen to any of the shareholders. The last thing that I wanted to chat about is life cover, and a lot of people have possibly kept their life cover in South Africa. Life disability, dreaded disease, or severe illness, depending on which company you deal with. Those policies might still be running here, and with two different jurisdictions, there could be tax complications and tax paid where you thought that it was a tax-free payout. So those need to be considered, and utilizing one company with two advisors in two different countries, we can look at the most effective tax benefit for you. The other last thing is, please do not cancel life cover in South Africa until you've replaced it with life cover in the UK, and that goes for your disability cover too, for that matter. So with those life covers, we can assist in making sure that the cover is in place there before we cancel here, and then we can handle the cancellation in South Africa for you, if that is what you want to do. So with the life cover and the other independent financial services that we offer, I would like to hand over to Matthew Young, who is in our London office, and he will take you through the balance of the presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us some time in your diaries. I am a financial planner in the London office for Alexander Beard. I moved here about 3 years ago, and I was a financial advisor in South Africa as well. So I'm well placed to be able to assist. I'll now run through some services we can offer to those who are in the UK looking to secure themselves financially for the long term. Whilst some UK terms and tax treatments are very similar to South Africa, in many ways there are important differences that could lead to a tax trap, as an example. I will now take you through some of these UK terms and possible planning considerations. Protection planning, ensuring that your life cover, critical illness and disability protection are tax friendly for your current situation. Are they sufficient to deal with the exchange rate volatility? We all know that the rand is prone to bounce around a bit, and you would hate to be undercovered. So it's worthwhile hedging your cover. Critical illness, will your current provisions pay out if you've left South Africa on a permanent basis? It's worth finding out. And is your income protected in case of disability and or illness, temporary or permanent? The next window or bracket we would have a look at assisting you with is your investment suite. For example, first off, pension funds, there are different tax reliefs available than those we're all used to that were in South Africa. You have an annual allowance of £40,000, and you have a lifetime limit of taxable pension relief you can contribute to of just over £1 million. For those who are in senior positions, your death in service benefits are counted as pension funding as well. So that could mean that you are taxed because your payout will be greater than the lifetime allowance. We do have a solution if that is your position, and we could chat more about that, a relevant life plan. Sometimes for those senior people as well, your annual allowance will be tapered, which means that you can actually contribute less than £40,000. And it's important that you stick to those guidelines, as there are penalties that could be imposed. We would have a look at your investment or your discretionary investments as well. We assist in planning them as tax efficiently as possible, whilst ensuring you're invested in a globally diversified portfolio and keeping that as cost efficient as possible. Moving across to the UK, your investment horizon has increased in terms of where you can invest and what sectors you are. You're not limited as you may have been in South Africa, which can be quite daunting, which would be, it would be good to have someone to walk you through this. We also have an asset management team who could offer a managed portfolio solution for those more sophisticated investors. This covers 16 sectors globally, and the research is updated monthly. We also are able to provide assistance with private health insurance for those who require a little bit more flexibility than the NHS provides. So that's worth considering. The last kind of two things we would look at, which kind of encompasses everything, is your estate planning. Inheritance tax in the UK is 40% if your estate is above the current nil rate bands. If you are looking to leave a family legacy, there are options available to you to reduce this tax burden. And finally, tax planning. We can assist with advice on tax matters, such as pension contributions and tax relief, capital gains tax implications, dividend taxation, as well as assisting self-employed individuals looking to unlock a bit more value from their businesses in a tax-efficient manner. To go through more of our offerings to business owners, corporates, charities, or schools, I'd like to hand back to our Executive Chairman and Founder, Paul Beard.
Thank you, Matthew. Hello again, everybody. We also have within Alexander Beard Group an international employee benefits division, and our main focus is foreign companies from outside the UK who have branches or workforce in the UK, Holland, France, Germany, and other parts of the world. That is our particular niche. And through that business, we can offer advice on partnership insurance, key person insurance, where a particular executive or equity holder needs to have a lump of money paid to the business should they die, to replace their value within that business. We can offer business loan protection, where a bank or a venture capital house are lending or investing money in the business and want the key individuals covered against premature death. Our employee benefit services, which extend to the directors and staff, are group pension plans, taking into account the government requirements for auto-enrolment, group death in service and disability, group private health insurance. We also offer advisor days, where a member of our advisory team will go in and talk to members of staff either on an individual or collective basis, updating them with different investment opportunities or financial planning services should they require it. For example, we offer a mortgage service through all our branches in the UK. We also have an online and interactive benefits portal where members of staff can choose to buy additional benefits, make additional pension contributions, or where appropriate. For example, if there is a single person who's a member of staff with no mortgage and no debts, they may feel they don't need a death in service benefit, so they could swap their individual cost within that for enhancement, for example, in their pension plan. That's just one small example of the online benefits portal, and all those services are available to clients in the UK as well as overseas. And that's really, ladies and gentlemen, all I've got to say today. Again, I'd like to thank the South African Chamber. I'd like to thank Marcel and his colleagues at Orbis, as well as my colleagues from South Africa and London for participating. And I'd now like to turn the presentation over to questions and answers. Thank you very much indeed.
Paul, Warren, Gordon, Marcel, Matthew, thank you very much for giving us some insight on the various services and some of the complexities that South African expats face. So I'm not sure who's going to answer which questions. We've got a few of them coming up on the Q&A session. Guys, if I could ask you please to add more questions so that we can keep the next half hour fully engaged and we can learn as much for our own personal benefits. One of the first questions I'd like to pose to you, and this came to you, Warren. A South African citizen who is tax resident in the UK is it correct that they do not need to financially emigrate from South Africa, but still will be able to transfer their assets away from South Africa?
Yeah, Gareth, who asked the question, 100% correct. The new legislation that was effectively passed in the budget speech in 2020 does allow a resident and tax-registered individual in the UK to transfer their compulsory assets, in other words, their retirement annuities, preservation funds, pension and provident fund values. Those would be then withdrawn as a early retirement benefit. Yes, they would be taxed in South Africa because obviously we enjoyed a tax benefit on those contributions. Once that tax portion will be deducted, the balance would then be paid into your blocked rand account, and then you would utilize your offshore investment allowance of that million, or with a tax clearance certificate, up to 10 million rand would be available to transfer to the UK.
Warren, can you just explain, I know you did in the original slide and you've just made reference to it again, what are the conditions under which the blocked rand account occurs?
Okay, so the blocked rand account is established for residents outside of South Africa and do not have a local bank account, or they're not operating a local bank account in South Africa. So in other words, these funds would then go into a block. It's literally a brand. It's a brand of an account. It's called a blocked rand account. And obviously with the tax clearances and all those that we do need up front, those are all put in place. And once those are those tax certificates are now valid, the funds can be then transferred from this blocked rand account across to the current account or check account which you have in the UK. So it's just it's with this new cash management system that South Africa is adopting, which is globally accepted. It's just to keep track of money leaving the country, and it's all around the anti-money laundering and obviously terrorism and control of those transfers of assets, just to make sure that they do comply and that all the boxes are ticked.
Thanks, Warren. I hope that's helpful to Garth on the, who did put his name up. Just another question. Warren, Garth has asked again, what about discretionary assets? I think you might have covered that already.
Yeah, so basically discretionary assets as we understand them is liquid money. It's not governed by the Pension Fund Act in South Africa, which is basically your unit trusts, your tax-free savings accounts, your linked platforms, as we call them, where you might be holding funds there. Those can be liquidated. They can be transferred again, like I say, into a blocked rand account. Once all the blocks are ticked, those funds can then be transferred across to the UK.
Thanks, Warren. Just in a similar topic, somebody who has not financially emigrated, is living in the UK with, let's say, dual passports, so they are in a position, they're not under visas or anything like that. What are there any restrictions for them owning a business back in South Africa, having investments back in South Africa? How does that impact them if they're financially immigrated or not financially immigrated?
Fundamentally, if you financially immigrated in the past, and like I mentioned, it is a long and tedious process, so 95% of people didn't do that, you would not have assets or any accounts or any tax number in South Africa any longer on a full financial immigration. As a tax resident of the UK now, what they've done is they've aligned the two. So you don't have to financially immigrate. They will classify individuals as full financial immigration and tax residency in the same light. They'll be treated exactly the same way. So going forward, you won't physically have to financially immigrate any longer. You will be classified as a UK citizen. In other words, your tax jurisdiction will be in the UK. No further tax will become payable in South Africa.
Thank you. That is very helpful. I'm sure that's going to make a lot of people's lives a lot simpler. There was a question here about, can an individual transfer their assets out of South Africa, but still retain them and hold them in rand offshore?
I don't believe you can, because fundamentally rands are invested in South Africa and South Africa only. My advice there would be is if they wanted to retain the currency in the South African rand, it would be better to hold them in South Africa. Let us in South Africa have a look at the management of those assets, the spread they want, the risk profiling, how long they want to leave them in rands versus alternatively transferring them into a foreign currency, and manage it from that point of view. There would be no real benefit to move the money out of South Africa in rands and retain it in rands.
If I can intercede there, Warren, I'm looking at the question online at the moment, and it actually says, can I transfer cash out of South Africa and keep it in Rand? Now, that's not a request we've had before, but I do wonder whether some of the branches of the South African banks, such as Investec and others that we are aware of, would allow a British resident to have a Rand offshore account in, for example, the Isle of Man or the Channel Islands, just a current account or a deposit account.
The way I understand it, Paul, at this stage, not at the moment.
Right. Okay.
Account,
I think that's worth clarifying, because I think generally people might expect that they could hold a bank account in any number of currencies.
Yeah, agreed. We can investigate.
Yeah.
On that side, just in terms of that, my other day job is a foreign currency advisor. So if anyone would like to make contact with me in terms of any offshore aspects of banking accounts and cash and some of those regulations, by all means, if you guys want to pass on any questions, I might be able to help. Next, a question that we had, do you give the legal and tax advice in both the UK and South Africa, or is it outsourced to trusted sources?
I think it's probably best that I can answer that in the first instance, and my colleagues can jump in if they've got anything in additional. We give legal and tax advice in connection with any investment advice that we might give. So, for example, and I think it was mentioned earlier, if we set up a pension arrangement either for a company or an individual, we will ensure that they meet all the tax-driven requirements of that arrangement. We are not tax advisors per se across the board. The other example I can give you, which was touched upon by Warren and Gordon, was the question of partnership insurance and buy-sell agreements. Now, buy-sell agreements are pretty much the same in South Africa as they are in the UK. And I personally have a lot of experience in this area from my days as an advisor. And most of the good insurance companies in the UK, the life insurance companies who offer this type of life cover, will provide a pro forma document that is legally sound. Having said that, we always advise a client to take independent legal advice, but I can assure you that we have used the pro forma documents on many occasions for partnership insurance or buy-sell agreements, and they've always been very, very legally robust. So there is an element of legal advice there. But again, I stress we would always tell a client to take independent advice. We do have a number of firms. We work with a cross-border tax specialist firm in London that we've worked for many years. They're absolutely first class, and we're very comfortable referring clients to them. And we have a number of firms of lawyers. For example, we use Shoesmiths, who are a very highly regarded national firm of lawyers for employment and HR advice if our clients coming into the UK, particularly foreign firms, obviously, who may be unfamiliar with the territory, we will recommend Shoesmiths to them if they have not found their own lawyers. And again, we do that because we've had very good experience. And as it happens, I know personally the head of Shoesmiths employment law for the UK, who's an absolutely top-class employment law lawyer. So we're very comfortable in doing that. We also have a firm of compliance lawyers that we can refer people to. And again, we stress that it's just a friendly referral. That obviously we can give them a couple of names if they want a couple of names, but we don't take any further part in the process.
Thank you very much, Paul. Does anybody else want to add to that before we move on to the next question?
Basically, we are in a similar position. So yes, we do not provide individual tax advice as such. We don't do tax returns or directives. We do refer if a client would require that. Same on the legal side. So legal aspects with regards to investments, pension funds, provident retirement, preservation, discretionary monies, we will give advice around the tax element on those, the benefits and the downfalls. But yeah, if a client does require legal or tax in a specific area that we don't actually advise on, we're happy to refer to these tax consultants and legal advisors that we use. Again, also, we've had a long-standing relationship with quite a few of them.
Thanks very much. Gordon, did you also want to say something there?
That's pretty much what I was going to say. Thanks.
Okay. I'm just going to combine two questions together, if I may. This one is probably directed to you, Marcel. According to the April fact sheets, the dollar Orbis Global Equity Fund has underperformed its benchmark over the last 1, 3, 5, and 10 years. What do you believe the investment policy will be delivered going forward? And then linked to that is, you're talking about your investment and your involvement within having your skin in the game in it. What defines outperformance in Orbis's terms?
Thank you, Sharon. I assume you can hear me. Let me start with the second part. Thank you, Sharon. Let me start with the second part of the question. Outperformance, how we define outperformance is we compare our performance with a benchmark. And the benchmark that we use for the global equity is the MSCI World Equity Index. And this is in line with what you can buy if you want a global representative index, for example, and buy a passive investment. So that is what we compared against. It's not an easy benchmark to beat. For example, the benchmark over the period mentioned, 5, 10, 20 years, has actually beaten the average fund, and that is our benchmark. Let's turn to our performance. And yes, the listener is correct that over the last 3, 5 years, even up to 10, we have slightly, more recently, over 3 years, but over 10 years, slightly underperformed that benchmark. And one can ask, why have we underperformed? When Orbis either overperforms or underperforms, the reason is the stocks that we pick. So we are a fundamental manager. We look at the different companies and we pick those different companies. Over the last 10 years, there's been substantial headwinds for a manager like Orbis. So if you look at the investment style of how we manage money, Orbis is a value-orientated manager. What does that mean? In other words, we look at the intrinsic value of a company, and we will only purchase a company if it's substantially below that intrinsic value. Over the last 10 years, what we've seen is that the quality growth style, and here especially I refer to the famous FANG stocks, the Apples, the Facebooks, the Netflixes, etc., has performed extremely well, together with low volatile stocks, for example, consumer staples. That will be your Coca-Colas, your Nestle's, Diageo's, etc. Those stocks, in our estimation, are extremely expensive, and therefore we've not been in those stocks, especially over the last 3 to 5 years. And those stocks continue at the moment to power ahead, but we don't believe it. Our investment style, we believe that when we purchase a stock, the price that we purchase it is the most important thing. And we do not purchase any stocks if we believe they are overvalued. Whether that investment style will change going forward, we're very excited about the portfolio. The portfolio is substantially cheaper than the index at the moment. And we've seen the biggest differentiation between growth style and value style now for many years. To an extent, we're back to 2008. So we're very excited about the portfolio. Yeah,
linked to that, Marcel, just related to that, another question. Is there a typical size of investment? Is there a minimum type of investment or a maximum type that they can come into your different types of funds?
In the UK, if you invest in the UK, £1. So it's as simple as £1, and you can literally invest as little as £1. So there really is no big sizes. It's really for the man on the street.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. What is the situation? I think, Warren, this was set towards yourself. Your other colleagues can also join in. If you are living in the UK, not having emigrated or financially emigrated, or having immigrated into the UK either, and have local accounts in South Africa, can your retirement annuity be cashed, taxed, and paid into your local account and then transferred to a UK portfolio, probably through the 1 million or the 10 million, but through the current account and not through the blocked RAND account?
Sure, in the way I understand, obviously this is all a new process that's been introduced as of March. So I think a lot of the guys are finding their feet at the moment, although the administration companies that administer RAs and those kind of things are geared up to accept these applications as they're coming in. My understanding is you could effectively convert your South African account that you do have into a blocked RAND account. And as you rightly said, the funds would then be treated as a withdrawal, early withdrawal from your RA, taxed. Those funds would then effectively go into your blocked RAND account, and that could be your current account. And thereafter, once the blocks are ticked, transfer across to the UK.
So how does the blocked and your current account differ to each other?
Right now, if you have a current account, that account is not dictated to that you are not a resident in South Africa. So as far as the account holder, in other words, whether it's First National Bank or Standard Bank or Nedbank, as far as they're concerned, you are still a client in South Africa because your account is active. They're not aware that you might be residing in the UK or that you are no longer earning interest or earning any money that's going into that account. So the blocked RAND account is literally established because you're no longer a resident or taxpayer in South Africa because you're residing and taxpaying tax in a different country, in other words, e.g. the UK.
So you can maintain your current account for your expenses and your property or whatever small amount you might be getting in and out. And the blocked RAND is for the things that you want to take out the country?
Correct. Yeah, the blocked RAND account is literally established in order to, these are the funds that are going to be liquidated, they're going to be transferred in there. My intention is to transfer that across to the UK or the States or Australia, wherever you might be residing and paying tax.
If I can pick up a question I think we've passed by, which actually plays into this. There was a question earlier about if the individual is not domiciled in either the UK or SA. I'm interested in the word domiciled as opposed to resident. How do I transfer assets out of South Africa without bringing them into the UK? Warren, Gordon, you might want to comment on this more expertly than me, but I wouldn't have thought that it matters whether they're domiciled in either of these countries, because the financial emigration rules would still apply to them. They would have a blocked RAND account, and that blocked RAND account, when all the collection of the money was completed and the tax was paid and the clearance was given, I assume would pay out to any bank account in the world, providing the individual proves that they are the legitimate owner of that account. Would that be a fair answer?
100%, Paul. So fundamentally what we look at in South Africa is the dual taxation treaty. So we do have one with Australia, we do have one with the UK. So yeah, as long as there's a dual taxation treaty in place between South Africa and the country you're residing in, the same rules would apply to anybody living outside of South Africa.
And to what extent could you support such an individual to countries if they are not in either of these two, UK or South Africa?
It doesn't matter to us.
You've got an Australian office, you've got a US office.
Yeah, it doesn't actually matter, because the the service we're offering here in relation to releasing stranded assets and financial immigration relates to the services we provide in South Africa through the business that Warren and Gordon run. So it doesn't actually matter to us where they live, because the work's being done in South Africa, the Block Rand account would be open and then the money would be sent to wherever they are. Does that answer that for you? Yeah?
Yes, it does.
Great.
Great.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Another question is, do you get treaty protection if you withdraw your pension after you've ceased your South African tax residency, i.e. no South African tax paid and only UK has taxing rights? And if so, how do you practically get the pension provider to not deduct the tax and pay it gross to you?
At this stage of the game, Sharon, the way our understanding is that while those contributions were made to that pension, provident or retirement annuity, when you were resident in South Africa, you enjoyed a tax deduction on those contributions. So when those maturity, that early maturity is processed, it's processed as a withdrawal, and therefore tax will be deducted in South Africa.
Right.
For those,
short and simple.
There's no avoiding it, in other words.
there's no avoiding that one.
I
there
think
has
just
been
to add
Matthew.
to that, once the funds are transferred across to the UK, they obviously become voluntary funds. That the UK is not going to tax them again as a pension income.
That's a good point. And there's also something I'd like to add there, Matthew. If I'll just give you a quick example, and we have experienced this with other expats in different situations. If an amount of money is transferred into the UK, as described by Matthew there, and let's say that amount of money is below the annual pension allowance as a lump sum, then that amount of money can be reinvested into a UK pension net of basic rate tax, providing it is within 100% of the individual's UK gross earnings. So, for example, if you've got somebody earning, say, £60,000 or £70,000 a year, and they receive a payment net of tax in South Africa of £30,000 equivalent, they can reinvest that into a pension in the UK as net of basic rate tax, and that amount will be increased by a repayment from the Inland Revenue. So that can be a way of recovering the South African tax on the outgoing payment by reinvesting it tax efficiently in the UK net of tax, and the pension company or trustees will recover the tax from the Inland Revenue.
Any other updates on that from anyone else? Okay, there's just been an update by one of the attendees stating that Standard Bank does offer an offshore Rand account. So just so that all the other people can understand that, there are also brokers that offer Rand accounts, and there are also debit cards that can be credited in, or you can not always put Rands into them, but you can definitely use Rands off them. So there are a couple of options that are there. There's been a question as to what are the charging structures, Matthew?
Right, so we've got different types of charges for different types of services that we offer. I think it would be good to state that the first meeting we would invite the client to attend with us is free of charge, and really that's a fact-finding meeting where we triage what it is exactly that we may be able to assist with. That's normally about an hour meeting, and we really go into the client's circumstances, objectives, risk profile. After the meeting, we're able to then sharpen our pencils and see if there is a way for us to assist the client, at which stage we would offer, if the client's looking for a financial report or a suitability report, we would charge a fee for the report alone. If as a result of the report, the client would like to implement the recommendation, we would then charge an implementation fee, which would negate the report fee, if that makes sense. So it's not two different costs. And then, of course, if the client would like ongoing financial advice, which includes an annual review where we pretty much follow the same process, update the objectives, update the circumstances, and any changes to the risk profile, produce the suitability report, and make sure that everything is still in line with the client's needs, there is an ongoing fee as well. But that's also not mandatory. If the client doesn't need the ongoing service, that's optional.
I think it's also worth adding, Matthew, thank you for that. It's also worth adding that at the first meeting, the client receives an agreement which shows in detail the level of fees. And obviously they do vary from case to case, which is why Matthew hasn't quoted a specific fee here. And again, to reiterate, any fee charged for a report will be credited against any implementation fee to avoid any double charging. And a lot of companies do not do that, but we do. But we're happy to send anybody a draft client agreement which has our fees schedule within it without any obligation. If they just like to look that over before they talk to us, we'd be very happy to do that.
Just doing a clarification, Warren, on one of the points that was brought up a little while ago. On the question of the transfer coming into the UK, and I'm not too sure on exactly what condition it has come from, pension monies or otherwise, won't the UK charge a tax on the remittance?
No. That would be coming in as voluntary money into the UK. So taxes already, like I said, because we have a dual taxation treaty with the UK, you can only be taxed once on the same source of funds.
Yeah, and certainly there's another thing which I can speak to here, which is the UK generally only taxes earned income overseas. Investment income is generally not taxed in the UK until you bring it back on a proportional basis. So, for example, if somebody had invested overseas for 10 years and returned to the UK and then liquidated those investments 5 years later, they would be taxed on 1/3 of the growth. But that generally applies to UK taxpayers who have invested money outside the UK before they returned. So again, I doubt very much whether that would apply. Generally speaking, the blanket answer is exactly as Warren said. If it's been tax paid in the South Africa on exit, there is no further tax in the UK.
Thanks very much. Anybody else want to add? I've got another similar related question going along the lines of where Paul, you came from a moment ago.
Yeah.
What are the rules / tax regulations of South Africa registered trusts paying beneficiaries by paying into a UK registered trust?
Oh,
if you want me to repeat it, I shall.
Can I get back to you in about an hour?
Can you draw a picture?
What you're saying is that we have a client here who may already have an offshore trust.
A South African registered trust.
A South African registered trust.
South African registered trust that pays the beneficiaries and the beneficiaries are paid by receiving the monies into a UK registered trust.
So the South African registered trust is paying a UK registered trust the benefits as laid out under the terms of the South African registered trust. Agreed.
That's my understanding too.
Right. Thank you, Sharon.
A picture drawn.
I don't know why I'm saying thank you. My view would be that the trustees of the UK trust are liable to tax on those payments. A UK trust is interesting. Generally speaking, people have offshore trusts, but a UK trust would have to be, or is deemed to be a UK trust, in my understanding, if the trustees are UK resident. So if it's a firm of lawyers or accountants or trust company trustees in the UK, then it's a UK trust. And my clear understanding is that any income and capital gains that trust benefits for must be paid under the trust taxation laws by the trustees, not the beneficiaries. It's their responsibility, in other words. To get deeper into that, I'm afraid you would need an accountant who is expert in trust taxation. And we know two firms that we deal with because a number of our clients have offshore trusts perfectly legitimately.
Are there any restrictions for an expat to actually do physical business in South Africa, earn income in South Africa and repatriate in terms of it being in the company? Is there anything stopping them being a shareholder and or a director in a South African company? And would it be different if they're financially immigrated or not financially immigrated?
So you're talking about South African expats here who might have an interest in a South African-based company?
Yeah, they personally own the shares either in their own name or through a company structure here.
If they're tax resident in the UK, and I'll defer to Gordon and Warren in a second for the other end of the answer. If they're tax resident in the UK, they're no different than me and my company, because obviously we own a company in South Africa.
Okay.
And it's perfectly legitimate. There's no problem with that. And any dividends that are payable to Alexander Beard from its ownership of the South African business would be taxed in the same way in South Africa as the dividends that would be payable to Gordon and Warren as co-owners. Now, if I get my dividends, and I say my, I mean Alexander Beard Group's dividends here, they would be net of tax in South Africa. I then declare them as part of the revenue for Alexander Beard Group in the UK, and I offset the tax payable, I offset the tax that's already been taken in South Africa against my tax bill in the UK because of the double taxation treatment. Have I expressed that correctly, guys?
Spot on, Paul. Spot on, Paul.
Yeah. So I just don't think there's an issue there, Sharon. It's
Okay.
perfectly straightforward as far as I'm concerned.
And last question, we've got 2 minutes to go. If a expat suspects they've lost, forgotten, don't remember what assets they may have left behind, are you able to help them?
Yes.
No, short and sweet. Gordon, would you like to give us some more?
Yeah, sure. So effectively what we would do is we do a tracing exercise using their ID number, which, if they give that to us and their authority to investigate, we'll trace it with all the companies, see where we can find those assets that they might not know about or forgotten about, put a report together and then say, yes, you know what, these are the assets, this is where it's housed, what would you like to do with the next step? Okay.
I think we have got through most people's questions. I'd like to thank the panel for what turned into a Q&A of fantastic interest and insight and solving some of the individual questions that have been brought forward by all our participants. Thank you very much, gentlemen. This has been a very enjoyable exercise. And Marcel, thank you very much for introducing Alexander Beard. And I hope that there are some solutions being provided to expat South Africans in the future. And from the Chamber side, our next webinar is on Tuesday, and that is at UK time 9:30, and it'll be the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank. So I hope to see you all on Tuesday. It's only being announced now because we only have now got final time confirmation from the Governor. So hopefully you will be with us to listen to Lesetja.
Thank you, Sharon, on behalf of us. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
and thanks for the
Marcel.
questions from the floor. Appreciate that. Kept us out of mischief.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes, Paul.
Appreciate it.
Bye.